Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the Two Sisters on Adventures podcast. So, as you know, we're talking about the Loowit Trail, which is the trail that circumnavigates Mount St. Helens this week. So last week we told you about the feelings of reaching the sign that says you're finally on the Loowit Trail, and we were honestly just so excited about it. But I was thinking about it, and it was kind of funny because on that little climbers trail type of thing that we went up, we saw quite a few people, and we saw several families. And I just remember there was this little boy who saw us going up there, and he was like, "Just so you know, up ahead, there's a spot with a lot of big boulders." Mm-hmm. And we thought that was kind of cute. Yeah. But then I started thinking to myself, I knew that there were boulder fields along this route. And I was like, shoot, are we going to be on a boulder field right now where we're going to have to find our way? Because Mount St. Helens, if you've ever climbed it, you know, you have to literally pick your way through a boulder field. There's no trail. And you have to follow these like huge tree stumps type of a thing. I don't know how to describe it. Logs? Okay. You follow large logs kind of that give you...
I guess you could call it a post.
Or an elongated tree stump.
No.
Anyway, so you have to follow those. And I thought that is really going to cut into our mileage for today because we were hoping to get about 10 miles in before the sun set. Luckily for us, it was the portion of the boulder fields where there's well, first of all, actually, we were in the trees for, I don't know, maybe like the first half mile, which was kind of nice. And then you kind of start to break out above tree line and you're in the boulder fields, but there's an actual legitimate, honest to goodness trail that you can see. Yeah. So we were super psyched about that because, I mean, it's always going to add more time if you have to pick your way through a boulder field. And at the time, I thought there was only one boulder field. So that's not true. But I was like, sweet, this is awesome for us.
And so it was kind of fun because, like Carrie mentioned, you know, we hit the Loowit Trail. So now we're actually walking on that specific trail and we were in the forest for a bit. And then you can see the boulder field, us going counterclockwise. We could see this boulder field to our left. And then the trail finally kind of met with the boulder field and we started to ascend that. What was really nice is that as we ascended the boulders on, as Carrie mentioned, an honest to goodness trail, we could actually start to catch some views of like Mount St. Helens itself. And then as we continued to climb, we actually could see views of Mount Adams to our right, Mount Hood behind us, and then in a little while, even Mount Rainier. So on a clear day, it's like a flip of the coin, right? Because a little bit of cloud cover is nice if it's warm because it keeps you cool. But on a clear day, this trail is just incredible with the amount of views that you have, especially because you get to spend so much time in open, exposed terrain with the potential to just see everything that's around you. So as we started to climb up in the boulders, once again, it was pretty easy to follow, but it's not exactly like a strided out type of trail because you are having to adjust your steps a bit to climb up and just kind of clear different obstacles. And so there was one section where we were supposed to take the trail and turn right, and we started to go left, and there was even this now I can't even think of the word. A log. I don't know. Whatever they use to mark the trail. Post is probably a better term. There's like a post there, and we went one way and then realized we were not on the trail, so we were able to double back and find our track. But I don't know. I would look at my watch and I realized, you know, we had really set our goal for a very ambitious pace. And the boulder field was slowing us down. Like we were making good time, but we weren't making fabulous time that was going to get us like 10 miles into the trail before it was dark. So that was interesting, but really just very much enjoying the scenery. This east side of the mountain, there's just so many beautiful views of Mount St. Helens. Like I don't think that there's any stretch of trail once you get out of the trees on that east side where you don't have just like a really nice view of the mountain. And since we went earlier, in the month of June, there was still a lot of snow on the mountain too. So it was just very scenic.
Yeah, so it was very scenic. And honestly, 4 miles in, we already found running water, which was kind of fun because I always am like, will there be water? Won't there be water? Will there be water? Won't there be water? And to already come upon water when you're only 4 miles in is just like, yes. And I actually had already drank a liter of water by that point, which is kind of crazy because it was not hot and it was not all that sunny. Like, sure, there's a little bit of sun, but you know, the sun at 7 p.m. is not quite the same strength as the sun at, 3 p.m. So we refilled my water there and I don't know, we kind of went back and forth like, should we carry some water or should we not? But ultimately we were thinking, okay, obviously this area has a lot of running water still because no one has mentioned in any reviews I've read having water 4 miles past June Lake. So we went ahead and filled up there just in case. And the nice thing was we knew we didn't need water for dinner per se. We just needed water to drink. So we kept on going, and honestly, the views were just so good. And I think when I go back and forth between like, is it crazy to start that late or was it good for us? It is crazy. And I'm not saying you should do it necessarily unless you're similar to us, but it really made for such beautiful views during that section because all of the mountains were out. We could see Mount Hood, which was, the place that we circumnavigated last year. So that's kind of like a fun, almost full circle moment. We could see Mount Adams, and then, they just were glowing in the beautiful alpenglow. And I don't know, it was just such an exciting area to be in.
And you could see Mount St. Helens very well this entire day, but there were a couple clouds just kind of like sitting towards the top. And so as we continued on, then those clouds start to turn a little bit pink as well. And so Carrie and I have mentioned this several times, but most often when we're in the Pacific Northwest, the sunset that you hope for is never the one that you get. It's usually like, oh, the clouds like have disappeared and now it's just like the light turns off. But we got to really enjoy just this really beautiful alpenglow around us, and then just like a nice pink and purple hue in the sky, which as you're walking in the evening, the temperatures are perfect. There were no bugs. There's just like this slight little bit of a breeze. I just felt like so fortunate to be out there, and like we had made the right decision to start in the evening just because we were having such an awesome time.
And the temperature was perfect for us. We are not hot weather girls. So as you continue on, the trail transitions from that boulder field to this very, very brushy area, which is kind of crazy because it's like you literally go from boulders to all of a sudden, I feel like we had to like go between some bushes where you almost couldn't see anything. And then you're out in this area where everything is green, like as green as can be. There's no real visible boulders. Also, the trail is about as wide as 1 foot. And so you try not to step off of it, but you kind of can't see it either.
And there's also plenty of sticks that are wanting to stab you in your thighs. And I always have to chuckle when Carrie will like walk because she was ahead and be like, oh, and then I'm say 5 steps behind her. And then before I realize why she said that, I'm also being stabbed in the thigh like she was. Oh, so it's like good if your legs are a little itchy because it's a nice little scratching for them, and then you continue on your way.
I mean, it's gonna make your legs a little itchy too because you're just being scratched continuously. There we saw, I think, the first people we'd seen all day other than those who were already camping at June Lake. Yeah. There was a couple and they were returning from, I don't think they went all the way around the mountain. They said they hadn't. So they must have just been doing a day hike and kind of heading back probably later in the evening than they were planning to. If maybe not, you never know. But that was another great area for really good views. Like, again, could we see Rainier? Yeah, we started to be able to see Rainier, and our spirits were just like so high. We'd had such a good day, and here everything was so beautiful.
And so we, had now spent maybe a mile walking after the boulder fields. I felt like we were kind of starting to pick the pace up, and I was like, okay, this is great. Maybe we're not going to make it 10 miles, but hopefully we can at least make it like 9. So we round the bend, and we are greeted with our first gully of the day.
Yes. So one of the many unique challenges of this trail, right? Each trail has its own unique set of challenges, as we like to say.
And we find that circumnavigations are going to hold always a challenge because anytime you're going all the way around something, there's no way that you can cut out all the obstacles. So you're going to find some challenges.
But one of the kind of interesting challenges specific to this trail, right? Like they were there on Mount Hood, but in much better shape, I guess I'll say, is the presence of gullies. So basically the best way to describe that is there's a ton of, like, all around Mount St. Helens where it's not boulder fields. It is basically just very unstable volcanic layers. And I don't know if at some point like a lahar cut through this area or what, but it's like pumice, right? So it's very, very light rocks that it's hard to create a footpath through. So as you come to the edge of the gully, it's basically like a chasm. Like you look down and and suddenly there's just this huge drop off and it forms this V in the mountain. Sometimes there's a creek at the bottom, not always on Mount St. Helens, which is interesting because I feel like on other mountains, it's like, oh, I have to go down because there's a creek. That makes sense. But on these, sometimes there was no creek. And so it was very intimidating because I don't know, do you think we had to drop like 500 feet? No, not really. Like we had to drop 10 feet. I'm just kidding. It's not, but it's a massive drop downhill. And that's one thing I would say is if you do not like exposure, meaning like you don't like to be on the edge of a cliff with very, unstable rocks. Yeah. And less than ideal footing. If you're not comfortable with that, this may not be the trail for you. Would I say that's my favorite thing to experience? No. But I feel like I've built up my tolerance over the years where I know that I can do it. But still, when we came to the edge of that gully, I was like, oh no, like this is a big drop and this is some very unstable rock. But we did it the only way that you can do it, which is just one step at a time. So we kind of just started heading down into the gully and Molly was behind me. But another thing that it's kind of good to know and to keep in mind is if you're heading into a gully and the footing is pretty unstable, it's good to leave some space between yourself and anyone else in your party. Basically, just because if they're going to, sometimes there's big old boulders that just start rolling. So if they cause some to roll and they're behind you, it's best to not be in the path of those.
And so I was trying to look for my altimeter and it doesn't seem like it would track it all that well, but I would say probably the gullies are anywhere from like 50 to 200 feet deep. And it just, and probably averaging like 100. And so it's not like it's this like extremely like, you know, the challenge of it isn't like having to go like down and uphill like your physical fitness. The challenge of it is it's just very tedious to walk along this kind of like almost a cliff edge made of volcanic material, so basically gravel, that you have to just navigate. So you're glad it's not anything steeper than what it is, and probably the one that we went down to get to the Toutle River, it was like 1,000 feet. But anyways, most of the gullies, you know, 50 to 100 or so feet deep, but you're having to navigate the hillsides. And it's kind of interesting because I was visiting with Carrie as we were hiking and then afterwards on why we had not done this trail when we lived in Oregon, because it would have been the perfect, you know, beginning of the season backpacking trip. It's truly just an absolutely gorgeous trail with so much different terrain to appreciate. And it's not this insane distance either, so it's something you could do as a 2-day trip very reasonably. And Carrie reminded me that really the thing that was a barrier for us for several years was that we were intimidated by these gullies. And so, you know, after all the hiking we've done, it wasn't necessarily my favorite thing in the world to go in and out of the gullies, but it was a challenge and something that required a certain comfort with some exposure and just feeling confident in your ability to like maintain your feet in that type of terrain. So something where you know, making sure that you're feeling comfortable with heights and just being able to be confident in yourself and how you're moving in those areas is important before you're doing a trip.
One thing that was kind of some good advice that we saw online that I didn't apply to our first gully, but I learned why we should, is as you're going down into the gully or before you start, look across and plan your route up. And the reason why that's helpful is because you go down into this gully and then you kind of we went up into like just a very small uphill and then down into the second half of the gully. And by the time we got down there, it's kind of like you can't actually see all the time where the trail starts going up. So we definitely wasted a few precious minutes kind of looking around, trying to think through the best route. And like, you know, do I go right? And it looks kind of like it gets weirdly cliffy. Do I go left? Like sometimes there's not really footprints. There's not necessarily a cairn. And you have to really pay attention. This trail, I was always saying to Molly, this is not just like a daydreamer's trail where you can just like honestly, the PCT, very hard, very challenging. But you can kind of just cruise sometimes. Like you don't have to think about where you're putting your feet. You can look around, you know, you can just think about stuff. Here you have to be thinking on the trail and focused on living in the moment, which actually is kind of a bonus. I really enjoyed that. So it was kind of funny because we'd seen someone at the top on sort of like the cliff area on the other side that was obviously just kind of hanging out. And it was funny because Molly and I were discussing with each other, like, is it here? Is it here? And I thought to myself, man, if I was up there and I heard people trying to figure out how to get up, I'd probably be like, the trail's over there, but whatever.
And so it's interesting, like Carrie mentioned, because when you are descending into the gully, you can kind of see the like thin line that's the path that most people are taking out. And certainly when we got to the uphill part of this gully, we could look back and really see the trail going in. So something to just be watching for, because you will save yourself a little bit of time. And I think there was maybe one cairn at the bottom, but still once we got to it, there was not a defined footpath. And then the footpath that we took, I'm pretty sure was the one most people took, but it was like weirdly on the edge of like this 30-foot cliff that we were like, this is not fun. So it's just a nice plan, as Carrie mentioned, to try to plan your exit as you're entering, because that's going to be the best perspective that you have before you're actually in the valley and now having to figure your way out.
Yes. So we did finally make it to the top. And honestly, that was probably like one of the most beautiful places that we were maybe on the entire trail. And I was jealous of the guy who had set up his campsite there just a little bit, because I was like, that's nice. But you had this perfect view where as you're walking down the trail, you're looking at Mount Adams, and it was lighting up with alpenglow, and the grass was like an electric green. And when you turn around and looked up at Mount St. Helens, the light was playing across the clouds so beautifully. And so I think that was just like a moment where, again, like I kind of was starting to internalize and understand how difficult this trail was going to be, and how hard of an objective it was going to be to do in not only 2 days, but to roll out 10 miles after 6 p.m. Yeah. But it was kind of a moment that made it all feel very, very worthwhile. So as we continued on,
well, first of all, we like got to the top of the gully and we saw this guy who had put his tent there, and he's just sitting there just really enjoying the view of Mount Adams, which I would have loved to sit there for an hour and look at Mount Adams too. And we were walking and we were almost to him, and he still had never turned around to like look at us, which was surprising because we're not like the noisiest of hikers, but we do make more noise than nothing. And so when we finally got to him, he had his AirPods in, and so we said hi, and I don't know if we scared him a little, but it was just a little funny because we were wondering like why this man is like not looking to like see why we're making noise, but he was just soaking in the views and also listening to hopefully a really nice song.
Well, and I never like to like scare people or surprise them. So I was kind of trying to make a little bit of extra noise while I was walking, just enough to alert him that we were there. But then it was so funny because like he just kept never looking, and I thought, is it like he okay? But anyway, he was obviously just listening to something on his AirPods. We waved at each other. I think he
wanted to know like where we were camping or what we were up to, and we told him we were hoping to make it a few more miles, and he told us that I think it was like maybe 2 miles past where he was, there was a spot where a lot of people were camping where there was some water, and so we were thinking like, okay, that would be probably a feasible place to camp. And then he also kind of gave his summary of the trail. He said it was pretty gnarly, which the funny thing is, as Carrie and I went along, we like kept waiting for the really gnarly part, because the gullies we had just gone through, we felt like we're like, yeah, those are pretty challenging. And it turned out that I would say like the overall like challenge level of the trail is pretty consistent throughout. It's not like there's like there are sections that are definitely easier, like especially the blast zone where you can just kind of cruise for 10 miles. But then there are always like a sprinkled challenge, every couple of miles. So it's not like there's one specific section that's the hardest. It's just that there's those challenges sprinkled in as you were walking along.
I would agree though that it is a gnarly trail. Like, yeah, okay. Like compared to the trail around Mount Hood, which again, definitely challenging. Yeah, but I would just say Mount St. Helens is unlike basically any other trail I've ever done. And it's, I think, because of the geology and the history of Mount St. Helens, it is gnarly.
We continued walking, and oh my gosh, the alpenglow and just the sunset was so amazing, and we're in a really good mood. And we finally got up to the plains of Abraham.
I will say I had started getting very concerned after that first gully that we were going to just go through a ton of gullies back to back to back to back, and it was really going to slow us down. But I don't think we had any more gullies like that on the first day. So that was fortunate, and that helped us get to the plains of Abraham.
Yeah, and so I think we had 2 gullies. Like we had one that was smaller that took some time, and then we had the bigger one where it took us a few minutes to figure out our route out. And so we continued walking, really soaking in the sunset. The Plains of Abraham we've actually been to before, like a couple of years earlier. We went to Mount St. Helens also in June to enjoy the wildflowers. And so it was kind of cool to see it just in a little bit of different lighting in the evening. And then at this point we were I think we could finally, there's actually some clouds rolling in. So on the south side of the mountain, there were these big billowy clouds that looked like the type of cloud that we were living in inside of, in the Glacier Peak Wilderness for a few days. And we actually met some mountain bikers, and they were like, hey, there's some clouds coming, just so you know. And we're like, yep, thank you. And so we were almost to the point where people were pitching their tents. And was it called Pumice Butte, Carrie? By Pumice Butte. And so we knew there'd be water there and ideally maybe a little bit of shelter. There was a forecast for higher winds this night and also the chance of some rain, which then the day after that, it was supposed to be, clear and pretty nice. So we felt good about that. But we definitely, after our experience pitching our tents up by, is it called Cloud Cap on Mount Hood, we were not interested in being in a really exposed mountainside with only volcanic soils on which to pitch our tent because of the bad experience we'd had with our tent not wanting to stake well in just the light volcanic soils when Mount Hood started having wind rush down it when we did the Timberline Trail. So I was of the person, I don't know. Carrie and I, as far as our longest day of hiking ever, I think our longest day hike was 26-ish miles. And our longest day of backpacking until this year, I think was around probably 20 miles. I can't think of a longer distance we'd done, maybe 21. So if we would make it about 10 miles this day, we could then give ourselves about a 22-mile day of hiking the next day. Anything that we, weren't able to do after our 6 p.m. start would just be added to the next day. So we got to Pumice Butte and we were at about 7.3 miles. And I kind of wanted to push another mile or two further. Carrie's concern was really that cloud was hanging out just right after where this campsite was. And it is true that sometimes the trail is easy to follow, but other times you have to be prepared to follow either rock cairns or posts. And we didn't really know this next section if it would be easy to follow trail or not.
Well, and it was also a twofold thing because it was starting to get dark enough to the point that we would have to use headlamps. And I was like, if it was one or the other, I think that makes a difference, right? If we were going to have to go through fog and it was light out, at least, we have GPS. There is a general tread on the trail, so probably would be okay. If it was only the fact that it was dark out, but it was an easy to follow trail, we've done that before on the Tahoe Rim Trail when we started at 4 p.m. to get, 12 miles to our campsite. So if it was one or the other, I feel like I kind of would have been okay with it. But the fact that it was going to both be dark and be foggy / you'd be inside a cloud, I was kind of like, I don't really know if we want to spend an hour going 1 mile and have a kind of a bad experience at night, have a frustrating experience, not know where we're going to camp, blah, blah, blah.
And so, what kind of convinced me is just that we did have water available at this campsite. And when we got there were these shrubs and bushes that were growing along this water source. And so we were able to find a spot where we could pitch our tent basically inside of this shrubby area. So we'd been to the Plains of Abraham before. We'd never been any further down the trail, but we also were both familiar with this area being just basically a pumice plain. So there's not trees. There's not really any shelter. And so we talked about it a little bit and we both decided it'd be better to stop here where we know we have water, we have shelter, and then just get an earlier start the next day. And then once again, reserve the right if we aren't feeling the ability to push basically a 25-mile day on Sunday with our backpacking packs, that we would then be able to just, pitch our tent and then exit the following day. So we had the option to do a 3-day hike if we needed to, but stopping at this point did mean that we were going to have a really big day the following day.
And we finally started setting up our camp at okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, surprise, surprise, when we got there, not one person was outside of their tents. And this is a very popular spot for people doing the loop. I'm going to guess there were probably 12 tents pitched in different areas. Everyone was pretty far from each other, so it didn't feel busy or congested, but you could just tell this is one of the main places to camp on this entire loop. And once again, when we got there at probably about 9:30-ish p.m., not one person was out of their tent. Everybody was already in bed.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't like it, the sunset was over, all that kind of stuff. But actually, there was still some beautiful alpenglow because Molly captured a really nice picture. That is, I believe, a permanent spring, so there should always be water at Pumice Butte, is my understanding. But it's kind of cool because it's next to a cliff, and as it cascades down the cliff, it has like all these little pools that the water goes into. So it's kind of very picturesque and a very cute little area.
And then this, I believe, we were camping like right at the edge of Ape Canyon.
And you know what? I wrote down in my notes that it was actually 8:50 p.m. when we got to our campsite. So that's really quite good. That means that, I mean, it was 8:50 p.m. when you took a picture of those like waterfalls. So that means that we'd made it. Oh, okay. Never mind. It was not 8:50 p.m. But it was it must have been 9:30 then when we rolled into our campsite, which was great for how many like miles and over complex terrain we'd done. But also then when you're thinking, okay, I need to get up early and go quickly in the morning, it's kind of like all of a sudden you already feel frustrated because it's 9:30. You still have to set up your tent, eat your dinner, blow up your sleeping pads. And we for the first time ever this year are using sleeping quilts instead of sleeping bags. So you kind of have to set up your different sleep system. For us, that we have to dig our cat holes the night before. So we had to find a spot to dig our cat holes, which I think we kind of toyed with the idea of punting it till the next day. But I was like, I just don't know how this ground is going to be for digging cat holes. Also, there's people camping everywhere. So trying to find a spot where you can like dig a hole and no one can see you is kind of a complicated, tall task already. And also it's so steep and like scree all around you. So eventually we were finally able to find a spot. We had to start digging like 3 times, I feel like, and we kept moving our spots until we found one that we could actually dig a cat hole that was deep enough and wide enough and somewhat secluded enough and far enough away from camp. So I do think, I'm sure we talk about this way too much probably, but I do think it's really wise to be able to dig your cat hole the night before, because that way, rather than digging like that desperation cat hole where it's maybe not deep enough or wide enough or far away enough from water or camp, you actually do have a little time to do all that. But again, still kind of frustrating because it felt like we need to be getting in bed. We need to be getting our sleep because this is going to be the longest day we've ever backpacked. And this is very complicated terrain. And, we did sit down and eat our 6-inch Subway sandwiches, and I wished I had a foot long. It was so, so good. But ultimately, as the day kind of ended, it was like it had been a really good day and a really fun evening. But here we are suddenly in fog, and there's so many question marks. Like, how are we going to be able to finish it in one day? Like what terrain is coming up? Will we be able to see anything? Because we weren't really expecting this cloud to blow into our camp. Is it going to be really huge, massive winds overnight that are going to be able to like blow our tent away, even though I felt like we staked it in really well, and we even added some rocks to kind of give it some more stability. So it was kind of like you were excited to finally go to bed. We were excited to spend our first night sleeping outdoors for the year of 2024. But there's always those little unknowns that are kind of left with you.
And I can confirm that we went to bed about 10:47 because I was already fully like encased in my quilt, and I didn't want to have to take my arm out to turn off my phone. But Carrie was like, "Oh, I'm going to turn off my phone to conserve battery." And I was like, "Oh, could you please turn off my phone?" And so she was going to turn it off, and she was like, "Why is it taking so many screenshots?" So I have a series of screenshots from 10:47 p.m. when Carrie was trying to turn my phone off. And in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure a lot of you balk at the fact that we were going to go to bed at that time, but that's a perfectly reasonable bedtime for us, even when we're backpacking.
Yeah, it's just how we roll. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
If you want to know if we were able to finish it the next day, you can tune back in next week. And if you want to see any pictures or videos from this beautiful trip around the very unique trail that goes around Mount St. Helens, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. Bye.
Bye.